So to start the second part of this series, I'm going to start by working on the doors. I have some hinges left over from the other shop cabinets I made. These are half-inch overlay hinges, also called partial overlay. So what I like to do, especially if you haven't used these European hinges before, there's a lot of different varieties. It can get a little confusing. I like to mock one up on a piece of plywood, put it in place and mark where that overlay is going to be, and then I just measure in between that overlay. I measure in between those marks. It removes a lot of guessing, and then obviously the height is going to be whatever you want it to be. So this way I can pretty much guarantee they're going to be the right sizes. Now a lot of times for these rails and stiles on door frames I like to use poplar, but for this cabinet the premium grade pine at Lowe's was actually a little bit cheaper, and sometimes, especially because I haven't gotten around to painting or staining these cabinets, and to be perfectly honest, I probably won't, the pine's going to blend in a little bit better with the rest of the cabinet. Now I had also, you could see I showed those shop cabinets I had made before. I put some pegboard and some whiteboard on them to see how I liked it, and I actually use it all the time. It's super convenient, especially the whiteboard. When I have a lot of customers, for myself in the shop, I like to have visual reminders so I could easily look up at that board and kind of see my rough schedule. So I had used kind of a stick-on process before, but I found this at Lowe's. This sheet, it was like $9. One side's a black chalkboard and one side is that whiteboard. So I got that for these doors as well as some pegboard. And then I went through, and luckily enough, both of those sheets were about 3/16 of an inch, so all of my grooves and stuff can be the same. So I just roughly cut down my pieces. I'm going to be doing bridal joints for all of these. Anytime I'm putting weight on the front of a door, especially the one with the pegboard, I like to have these bridal joints because it's a full joint. It goes the entire width of the wood. Usually with doors and cabinets, I just do like 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch grooves. If you're putting weight on the door, I just like to make these. They take a little bit more time, but I just think they're going to stand up the test of time. So I'd cut all my pieces down to exact size at this point, so the dimensions I'd shown on that piece of plywood. When you're doing bridal joints like this, since the joints are all through joints, your perimeter and your pieces are going to be the same. If you're doing more traditional style grooves, you have to kind of calculate for how much the groove on the rail goes into the stiles. For this, it's kind of like box joints. The outer dimensions are going to be the exact same sizes as the pieces you cut. So then for the joints, I'm going to start with the through mortise there, essentially is what this is. I have a nice tenoning jig. You could see I set that up and cut them. It was a series of 3 cuts. I cut to a little offset of my center line and then flip it around and do the same exact thing. Get that tenon, do a test mortise, get that mortise, do a test cut on the radial arm saw to make sure I have the blade set up in the right way. And then for the tenon cuts, you can see I just do a series of curves. A much faster way to do that is to put a dado stack in that saw so you're not making a bunch of 1/8 inch curves. But for 3 doors, I decided not to change it out. And then I could just dry fit my frame together. Like I said, I went about 1/2 inch with the groove that goes around the entire piece, which will hold the panels. So I just marked on there for video purposes. Usually in real life, I don't need to do those calculations at this point, but you could see that it's easier to calculate how much of this panel is going to go into that frame. You're basically adding an inch to the inner width and height of that door panel. And then I could just pop these in place. Now because these are bridal joints and I had to cut off the groove, there is going to be a gap. You'll kind of see it in the video where the tenon and the mortise meet. Sometimes I fill those, but honestly for shop cabinets, I do not put the same sort of care in this as I would a customer project. That's not to say I don't build it as a quality piece of furniture. It's just a little gap in the corner of the door is something that's not going to bother myself, but might bother a customer, and it would be something I would fill. So then to mount these, I had leftover hardware from the cabinets I showed you before. These are very inexpensive partial overlay hinges. So far, I like them. They're obviously not going to be as nice as something like a Blum hinge, but once again, for shop cabinets, they're more than up to the task. I've mounted a ton of these before, and I basically just pulled the measurements off of the cabinets I already had in place. None of this stuff is going to come with instructions if you order it on Amazon like I do. So I just kind of eyed the height, and then I'll make adjustments from there. I could get it close enough that the fine adjustments on the hinges is enough for me to get them in place. And that is basically what it looks like. I decided to do the pegboard over where the motor is mounted because I thought it might add a little bit of ventilation for inside that cabinet. So then at this point, I'm going to be making the 2 drawers. The drawers are based, the hardware at least, of what I had. So I had side mount hardware as well as under mount hardware. So I'm going to be making these 2 drawers separately, two different styles, so 2 different dimensions. For the drawer that's going to have the side mounts, I decided to go with box joints. Once again, there's going to be a lot of weight in that cabinet. I happen to have this box joint jig because I made it for another project. I've been using it for over a year. Very simple to set up, very easy to use. So it's a quick way to put real structural joints on these frames. Sometimes I'll use dovetails, but the jig I have for that is a little more tedious to set up. This is pretty quick. Making one box is pretty simple. And then once I have the box joints on the edges, I could go through and do the groove on the bottom for my base. For this, I'm putting a sturdy 1/2 inch base on the bottom, once again solely based on weight. A lot of times in the shop I'll use certain size materials also based on what I have, and at the moment I happen to have like half a sheet of this 1/2 inch stock, so I used it when in other circumstances I might use something like 1/4 inch. So with those grooves on the bottom, I could slide everything into place. I can completely cover all these joints with glue, so I won't have to worry about it ever coming apart. And oddly enough, I did not plan for this, but this box is perfectly square. I don't think that's ever happened in the shop. It was about 14 1/8 by 14 1/8, and that was the finished piece. So I could let that set up overnight. Now for the undermount slides, what I wanted to do is I didn't want a drawer box. I basically wanted a pull-out shelf. When I'm turning, I don't have a lot of cabinet top space there, which I didn't want because I wanted to be close to the tool. And you're going to be using a lot of tools, so I wanted a place where I could put calipers and put tools when I'm not using them. So I had to kind of change the way you would make drawer boxes for these undermount drawer slides, and I basically, you could see, made 2 sides with a rabbet at the top, so that will go in the slide, and then my piece across the top is thick enough that I don't have to add a backer for the holes. But for the front, where the hardware that attaches to these Blum undermount slides go, I had to just add a spacer. And you'll see how I set those up once I go to install them. For these side mount slides, I'm not going to lie, it's been a minute since I installed these. I pretty much switched to undermount slides probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I haven't really looked back. So the instructions for these are long since gone. I basically kind of remembered that you mounted them about an 1/8 inch back, which is what I did. I always make sure to mount them in the holes that are adjustable so I can make fine-tune adjustments. And then I just mocked it up, marked where the slides were so I can mount the slides on the outside, and it worked pretty well. It was binding in the back. These were soft close slides, and I had broken them years ago, which is one of the reasons I took them off of the piece of furniture I had them on. So basically what I did was I could just completely remove that soft close mechanism, and then they worked fine. It's not going to soft close, but that is something I'm not severely worried about. For the undermount slides, you have to drill the holes in the back for fine-tune adjustments. I just kind of tapped those in place, drilled those holes with the marks that I tapped, and then this was a set of slides that I bought for a customer project, and it was one of those things I only needed, I think, 5 slides, but it came in a pack of 6. and one of the clips was broken. So for the time being, I only have the right hand side clip. The replacement clip is in the mail, so that one will look a little wonky in the video because one of the clips is missing, but it's still kind of working for the purposes of this video. For the fronts, I didn't want to add a bunch of weight to the fronts, so once again I had 1/2 inch ply, double-sided tape. I measured, basically wanted them to match the width of the cabinet doors, match the height of how high the pegboard door goes up, rough cut those, double-sided taped them in place, screwed them from the inside, and then that is what that false front kind of looks like. Same process for this one. This one I'll show a little later how I made these for a different part of the build, but I kind of mounted this tool rack on the top side of here, just really quickly cut some angled pieces, no fancy joinery on this, all butt jointed together, so that when I'm using the tool I could pull this draw out and have a place to rest more tools as well. So until that replacement part comes, I've kind of just used a piece of double-sided stick tape on top of this slide so that this will still maneuver in and out. And I had a little bit of leftover from that whiteboard blackboard piece, so just to kind of spice up this cabinet a little bit, I decided to cut those into 2-inch strips and frame out these doors so that I only used a 1/2 inch backer in order for them to be the same depth as the doors I made. Usually I use a 1/2 inch backer and frame this out with regular lumber so it looks a little bit like a shaker style door, but I had that leftover bit and I decided to use that, and now I could go in there and draw on those. Basically that will turn into something that probably my young nieces will mess around with when they come to visit. So then the middle cabinet is going to be where I put all my lathe tools. They're not the best lathe tools. I've mentioned I got a lot of them secondhand or from a yard sale. I don't do a lot of lathe work, which I've also mentioned before, but when I do need to do it, it's for a project where no other tool would work, and the tools I have get the job done for what I need. So I wanted a place to put all of those, so I'm going to be making some tool mounts. Luckily, I had done all the math for the offset of these, the depths of these when I made the tool rack for my chisels. So I basically just have a piece of wood the same size as the chisel wood, with a dado on a piece so I could mount it to the inside of the cabinet, and then I just cheated on myself, essentially mocked it up against the tool rack I already had and made all my marks. So that's how I cut the holes. The only difference is the lathe tools, the ferrule on them is a little bit bigger, so these are inch holes, whereas for my chisels they were 3/4. And if you want to just do what I did and I cut out those extra pieces of wood so the tools could slide in there, you could use them as is, but I like to finish them so they look a little bit nicer, and I put a chamfer on top, and usually the tool nests a little bit better with that chamfer as well. Then I could just go in, put some glue in that groove back there, and then I'm just going to tap some brads in here to hold it in place. It's a nice snug fit, so I don't need to use clamps or anything like that. And then I'm just going to countersink 2 holes. The back side of the cabinet is 1/2 inch ply, so I can drill right through into the back side cabinet, and it'll be sturdy enough. So that is basically what that looks like. And then I make 2 more for the sides. I'm not going to film it. It's the exact same process. I just made the one in the back first because it was a different dimension, and then I can measure for the sides. Things I didn't film, but I added where I put a strip of wood across this chisel holder in the front. They were sitting in there nicely, but I could imagine the vibrations from the lathes could potentially make some of those chisels fall forward. So now with that strip of wood, I don't have to worry about it. I added a safety switch on here, which is nice because before this lathe has no switch. It's a little bit older, so it's using kind of a jerry-rigged system in order to turn it on and off, which I didn't love. Those switches are not super cheap, but they're not super expensive. The cheapest I've ever found was about $30, but they're well worth it. This is a magnetic switch, so if I ever lose the electricity in the shop, I also don't have to worry about the tool turning on when I didn't realize it was on. And then I added a bunch of weight to this cabinet. I have these 2 pieces. One's a vise and the other is a book press. They're things I don't want to get rid of, but I don't necessarily have a spot for them. So I actually cleared up some space on the shop floor by putting them in the cabinets, and both of them easily weigh over 50 pounds each. So it's going to add a lot of weight to that as well. Filled up that drawer with stuff I had, and then I was kind of almost done with this, and I realized I had bought this bowl gouge years ago that I had never used, and it is too tall for any of my cabinets. I can make a special mount for it, but for the time being, I'm just keeping it kind of on the top there. You can see I went through, I made a TikTok drawing on the front of that chalkboard frame, and then this is basically what the inside looks like with all of that added weight. The motor mounted the doors. Like I said, that whiteboard has turned out to be invaluable in the shop. It's a great place to write notes. The pegboard, I kind of have a lot of the tools that I use a lot, so I never really want to fully put them away. Easy access. And then obviously the nicest part is the lathe turns on and works nicely. There's not a lot of excess vibration. I've mounted that motor horizontally before, and it just didn't work as well as having this mounted vertically. So I'm going to have a couple projects coming up with this stand.